All right, and we are now recording.
Thank you. Folks, we'll give it a couple minutes. Let some other folks, hello, Miss Grace. We'll let some other folks chime in and then we'll get started in a couple minutes. Yeah, people are filtering very nicely. Thank you for joining us.
There's advantages to a Zoom meeting. If we could offer refreshments, then we would really have it covered.
This is true. This is true. Trip, I see that you joined us. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm excited to see what came out of the Shred.
Dan, can you confirm the whiteboard is ready to go, the mural, please?
I'm checking now. Believe we are there. Let me send some last minute messages here and just ensure.
And Jonathan, Aaron, can you confirm if Mayor Sadler is joined us?
I don't see him quite yet. Scrolling through the pictures. I'm not sure that he's made it on quite yet.
I don't see him either.
Well, terrific. Jonathan, Aaron, how about in the interest of time, Jonathan, you want to welcome folks to, I guess, the grand finale, the pinup session, day 3? And you might have to unmute yourself, Jonathan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Mike, can you hear me?
We can sporadically.
How about now? I'm on my phone. I'm almost home to get on the computer. Can you hear me? How's sound now?
It sounds fine. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. Yes. Well, just want to welcome everyone. Thank everyone for participating this evening. We've had it as part of this 3-day planning process. We've gathered a lot of information from a variety of stakeholders that we've bundled with survey data that we've completed, through previous efforts. Again, we're about halfway through this process, gathering public input and analyzing that to develop a conceptual design for the 15th Street corridor that addresses the needs that are currently there. Again, we're roughly halfway through. Hopefully, at the end of today's session, we will go back to the drawing board, work up some conceptual designs, and host an open house a month and a half, 2 months out in the future. The hopes of that is that we'll be able to meet in person to have some additional discussion in order to kind of finalize some of the details for the corridor design and plan. But again, just wanted to thank everyone for their participation this evening, for signing on this afternoon. Again, this is somewhat informal, just kind of walking through the process. So I encourage everyone to participate as much as possible to voice any and all concerns you may have, so that those can be taken into account during the design process. That's all I've got. I'll turn it over to Mike at this time.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Again, for those that do not know Jonathan Russell, he is your town manager, your city manager. So thanks for the warm welcome, Jonathan. And today we'll be brief, but we're going to be very direct. You've been wonderful. Over the past 4 months, we've had over 1,200 people interacting, whether it's through a survey, an interactive map, the project symposium, which we hosted back in January, as well as the 3-day events here starting on Tuesday, Wednesday. Great interaction. We also had a number of key stakeholder interviews, groups, and setting. We're going to walk through that for those of you that were not with us over the past 2 days. But today we're going to we have to focus on some of the recommendations. And they're really a culmination of all of your efforts, your direction, the issues, the problems that you have identified along the corridor. Within the corridor, not only safety, not only vehicular mobility, accidents, crashes, as well as multimodal, or the lack of multimodal along there. Beautification was another interesting facet for here. And so we're going to walk through a lot of that. We're also going to give you an update on some of the, what happens beyond the right-of-way. It's just as important. So I think you're going to be pleased as we walk through this in terms of development and redevelopment along the corridor. So, and then last but not least, I think Jonathan alluded to it. Let's talk about what happens next. And it's more than just an open house 2 months down the road, but it's really, it's an opportunity for us to revise some of those concepts, work with the city and some of the constituents, make some tweaks and edits to the design plans, then come back to you and kind of celebrate what we're looking at. With that, we'll run quantities and do cost estimates for construction dollars, right? Where we're going to spend our money on terms of the physical infrastructure, as well as the potential impacts to right-of-way and the costs that are associated with that. And then our coordination efforts with NCDOT, because remember, they're the ones that own and operate this road. So we got to make sure we, play by their rules, we design by their rules, but we don't over-design. And we make this a holistic and a meaningful process for them as well. So let's jump right into it. And I'll go quickly over some of this information because a lot of you have been with us. So bear with me as we repeat this. But for those of you that have not been with us through this exercise, Jonathan Russell, you just heard from him. He is our city manager. And then Aaron Rule and Barikia are helping out with PR, logistics, and outreach, very responsive. So it's terrific. If you have any problems, you go to Erin. All kidding aside, she's been fantastic to work with. And so we look forward to keeping this collaboration alive. My name is Mike Rukowski. I'm a planner and engineer for Stantec. And with me are several people, two in particular, Amber Lewis, who's an urban designer, and Dan Henney, who is an attorney turned planner. So a multimodal planner. So those folks have been instrumental in moving this project along. Where are we at? I won't go into too much detail, but we're really in phase 3. We've done a lot of due diligence in the first 2 phases, the inventory, the data analysis. We hosted that project symposium, which is really an open house where we ask really tough pointed questions from all of you and giving candid answers in terms of problems, needs, and even potential solutions. So that was fantastic. So this 3-day charrette, this is the last day of the 3-day exercise. We've had landscape architects, urban designers, planners, engineers, all under one roof, working from 8 o'clock all the way to 7 o'clock at night, working on some of your ideas. And keep in mind, some of those ideas will be great. We'll memorialize them, we vetted them, and we'll move them forward. Others just didn't pass the muster, to be honest with you. There's trade-offs there. And so those ideas are just threw to the ground, stepped on, and went to the next big idea. The whole premise here is what we want to create, what we call informed consent, not consensus. No one ever gets 100% consensus. So if you have been part of this process since day one, then you realize that you may not get all of your 10 priorities, but you may walk away with your top 6, and that's important to us. And so hopefully we can all come to, when it comes to fruition, when it comes to the implementation phase, we can be supportive of what we see overall. I'll talk about next steps after this, but I am going to jump from here and go to our interactive board, which is also called Mural. And this is pretty important because for those of you that haven't been with us, what's interesting about this whole process is that we've never met each other face to face. All of this has been virtual for the past 4 or 5 months. So thank you for sticking with us. I can't wait to finally meet you in a couple months, but let's drill down a little bit. We went through, this is basically a 3-day exercise, and this is our due diligence up here, what we heard from the public, our survey results, our preferred access plan. We kind of walked through that. We went through day 1 exercise, day 2 exercise and actual design concepts, and day 3. We're gonna really hone in on the recommendations, show you what those concept designs look like, and some of those photo sims to show you the results of what would that look like on the ground today. Also, as you know or may not know, we've met with several folks. We've had 6 focus group steering committees just in the past 2 days, some with emergency services, fire, rescue, police, and a lot of those things that came out of there. We heard from your police chief, Chief Drakeford, and basically said, look, people are blowing through red lights just to beat the lights. And a lot of speeding tickets are more prevalent along 15th Street. And so that becomes a problem. So we really need to do a better job of controlling speed. Other folks say they just don't like to stop. So there's a lot of things that we're taking back from emergency fire and rescue. One from the fire folks, fire chief, is that they have a large design vehicle. So we need to incorporate that into whatever we put on the street or whatever limitations that we have in our redesign of the corridor itself. We want to make sure it accommodates large vehicles. It may be a large ladder truck for a fire truck, or it could be a WB50, which is an 18-wheeler that's going through the corridor and delivering goods. And so we got to be cognizant of that. We also talked to the appearance beautification and historic preservation folks, and that was really insightful. And they really reiterated a number of things that you suggested, but they also helped us to define the kind of the streetscape and landscape elements that we want to incorporate. They brought up a few things like wetland, stormwater filtration, because we now understand that there's flooding is most prevalent along certain portions of the corridor. And there's support for the need for a pedestrian walkway and separated facilities. That came through loud and clear. Other focus groups, we talked to the bike ped advocacy. The number one thing that folks kept on saying over and over and over again about this corridor is the inability to cross the roads safely. And I remember talking to a lady, Vanessa, that actually works for Affordable Housing District. And she mentioned just trying to leapfrog across the corridor and not having any high visibility crosswalks or lighting to do that. And people are basically taking their lives in their own hands, trying to run across there and play leap the frog over there. So other things that they brought up are bike pedestrian folks were ADA compliance. There's a number of folks that are disabled. And she actually mentioned, seeing folks in a wheelchair trying to get across unassisted at no signal. And that's a daunting task when you're talking about 4 lanes of traffic, and at some points up to 18,000 vehicles of traffic per day. And then slowing speed. Speed is really one of the most prevalent issues along the corridor. Lack of sidewalks, lack of bicycle. There's absolutely no bicycle facilities along the entire corridor, but getting across the intersection was really the key to success here, or things that we really needed to focus on. Economic development. We did meet with the Chamber of Commerce and economic development folks, business or development community. And a lot of the things they had to say is we want a better environment for the folks, our clientele that come to see us, not just the people behind the wheel in a vehicle, but we wanted to get folks to us by foot, by 2 feet and 2 wheels, just as important than vehicle themselves. I love this takeaway, and I think I mentioned it before. They really want to think about what this looks like after our public investment into the corridor for infrastructure. How will it respond? How will the private industry or how will the businesses respond back for private reinvestment in terms of redevelopment and development? And what will happen to encourage more business for our communities, our business community themselves? So what is it going to look like in the next 10, 15 years? And so we took a deep dive into this one catalyst site along the corridor, and we'll show you the results of that today. Focus group number 5 was neighborhoods and residents, the folks that live and work and play along that corridor, but primarily the folks that live there. And keep in mind, I think we threw out a statistic, 19% of the rental properties along this corridor have 0 vehicles. That means those people have to walk and they have to ride their bike to do every trip that comes out of their household. And that's a daunting task when there's no sidewalks and no crosswalks and no bike facilities. And so they gave us a preference on a number of issues about how they would prefer different treatments for signals and different treatments for non-signal crossings and locations. And their desire, honestly, they brought up other things like, we'd love to go to the park. We'd love more open space. And we'd like to go to like more restaurants. Everybody loves to say more restaurants in their community, but realistically, something they can go to on foot, have outdoor seating, maybe meet up with folks and have a cup of coffee or go to lunch and have, get yourself a sandwich someplace. So quick restaurants and convenient locations. Business community, that was the last one that we met with. A lot of great people on the phone. I remember Rob Rich, the owner of the Midtown Crossing, the Tractor Supply. His biggest interest was this public safety and trying to get people safe haven throughout the corridor. And I thought that was very interesting. Other elements were parking. The last time, unfortunately, when DOT put this together, the first time that the concept designs were developed a few years back, it took a lot of property, right? Remember, we only have 60 feet to work with, but when you widen this corridor, it takes a tremendous amount of property, it takes buildings, and it takes parking. So parking was a big issue the last time, and the business owners were really concerned about any parking being acquired as a product of this exercise. So that was important, as well as ingress, egress to their businesses, and rightfully so. So they want to make sure that their delivery trucks, in other words, can bring in their supplies and not have any issues in turning around, that sort of thing. So a lot of quick recap on the focus groups, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time putting the context. I think one of the most important things is this. We did have a framework for this entire process. I call this our preferred access plan. And just for those that are new to this project, we start over here at Brown Street and we go 1.6 miles to the west to Carolina Avenue, also US 17 business. And in there, these red, the blue and then the red symbols, circular symbols, are actual signals that are there today. The yellow are actual crosswalks, mid-block crossings that we want to incorporate in our designs. And why? Because if you think about it, I'll pick on this one. This is Market Street here, all the way down to Brown, where there's an existing signal. That's 2,800 linear feet, which means anybody that comes along this corridor has to walk an extraordinary amount of time over just to get to one of these 2 signal locations just across the road. Well, the reality is, like Miss Vanessa had told us, no one's going to do that. They're going to run across the road and they're going to make questionable decisions like we all would. and run across the road with no protection whatsoever. So we went in there and wanted to break up the separation between these signals and put in these mid-block crossings. And when you do a 5-minute walk shed, like a quarter mile, which is the distance you can get in 5 minutes, now you can see we're overlapping some of these high quality intersections. And that tells us that we want to get someone anywhere they're at along the corridor that wants to go across the street within 60 to 80 seconds of a high quality crossing. That's our, I guess, our philosophy in the walkability of this corridor. And now you can see the overlap. I think now we've been able to accomplish that if we can design it appropriately. So when we drill down, let's show you the before and after of the corridor. And this is really a lot of the elements have been voted on by you, voted on or at least provided some good direction. And then I'm going to stop and then we're going to look to the chat box. Dan, I'm going to call you out a little bit to talk about what we're hearing from the folks. And feel free to put comments in the chat box or even raise your hand. We'll try to recognize you and we'll talk about what we're seeing here. So this is what it looks like today. We've got 4 lanes and we've got from curb to curb, we have 48 feet curb to curb basically. And then beyond that, we have a little bit of room for right-of-way. Remember that the right-of-way hasn't changed on this corridor for over 100 years. It used to be a dirt road that they paved and then they added later on just another lane. So they didn't really acquire more right-of-way along this corridor. So our premise, based on what you told us, was stay within the right-of-way as much as possible to limit takings of property, to limit takings of acquisition of parking spaces or buildings. So our direction, after listening to you, remember the #1 issue is multimodal. So getting people on bike and on foot and those that are disabled through the corridor and across the corridor. So we're recommending bringing in that curb. That's right, repurposing some of that asphalt, bringing in the curb, reduce it to 3 lanes at 2-lane divided, and put in a 10-foot side path or a multimodal path. A lot of folks refer to it as that. We can put our street trees and pedestrian level lighting on the outside here, as well as some small caliper trees in the median to create that sense of enclosure. And remind you, and let's remind ourselves, the only way to control speed, which we know is a problem, is if we redesign the road. That's the only way to control speed. We can't simply just go from 45 miles an hour and put a 35 mile an hour speed limit sign and think that people are going to listen and pay attention to that. That's a fallacy. And so we've got to redesign it, sense of enclosure, putting in more high visibility bicycle and pedestrian treatments so people can understand if they're behind the wheel, they can expect to see a pedestrian or they can expect to see someone on the bicycle or someone in a wheelchair. So when we take that, and I'm going to stop right there. So let's do that. Dan, anything from the chat box?
Yeah, actually, you've got one comment, and this is from Fred Watkins. I think it's a good opportunity to talk about how we go about analyzing a corridor and the kinds of things we look at. So Fred says, I want to provide this additional info and opinion. According to the DOT and their average annual daily traffic, that's a measure of traffic volumes for 2019. Our traffic count is 20,000 at Bonner and at 22,000 at a point along 15th Street between Bridge and Market. With this amount of traffic in 2019, I can't imagine a 2-lane road with a center turn lane. It's more traffic than any location on US 264 from Hudnall Street all the way to the 17 bypass. And then he says 15th Street needs to be a 4-lane road with a center turn lane and pedestrian-friendly crosswalks at key intersections. More pedestrian-friendly access is important, but not as important as making this a safe road for vehicle traffic and easier access to the largest concentration of retail businesses in the Washington, Beaufort County area.
Awesome. And it was great. So that was Fred, right? Fred Walker. I'm with you. Thank you, Fred, for pointing that out. And here's the reality, and I've done this 1,000 times. I understand. It is a lot of traffic. It is a tremendous amount of traffic. But here's the reality. What you have right now is a 4-lane road. And I want everybody to come to realization, because we talked about this probably 10 times in the past 11 months or 4 months. But the reality is this, your 4-lane road is not working like a 4-lane divided or a 5-lane road. The number one issue with the road, as expressed by your community, is the lack of a left turn lane, a lack of a dedicated left turn lane. And in essence, this is what people are doing. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know it's true because I live in Raleigh and I see there's one, Wade Avenue is 4-lane as well. And this is the reality. During peak hour and off peak hour, you're in these middle 2 lanes and you're zipping down the road. God forbid that the car in front of you puts on their blinker to take a left turn, no matter where, on a side street or on a driveway into a business. And what do? You slam on your brakes, you quickly move over to the outside lane. Everybody did it. And now you're reducing that 4-lane to a 2-lane or 3-lane road. What in essence is happening with a 4-lane, because no one's building 4-lane roads anymore, is that the inner 2 lanes are now being, in essence, a left turn bay, especially during peak hour. And everybody's jockeying for position because everybody has told us that in the surveys and even in our polling in our project symposium. And it's true. This is the reality. So when everybody puts their left turn blinker on, it now reduces the carrying capacity of that road. And so a 3-lane, which isn't much less carrying capacity than a 4-lane, is what we're looking at. So 2-lane divided pockets of median. It won't be continuous median, but it is in areas that it makes sense to put it in there. So that's a good analogy. Good reality is, yes, there's a lot of traffic. It ranges from 13,000 all to 21,000, 22,000. But the reality is, you're still, the 4-lane is really acting like a 3-lane for most of the time that we're going through there. In other words, we also have to look at precedent. Where has this been done before? We worked on Hillsborough Street in Raleigh is a great example. It had 24,000 vehicles on it, and they reduced it only to 2 lanes without a left turn bay, with parking and with a bike lane on that. We're not being that aggressive on there, but it's already been in place. It's been in place for 15 years and it works wonderfully. Here's the other thing that's helping to your advantage, unlike what was helping Hillsborough Street. The reality is this: you do have 264, and a lot of times, often in the day, and that is the main route. There's a lot of people that are cutting through 15th Street to go from A to B without stopping at all. So we want to make sure there's a good balance there. We do have a good grid network, but you have US 264 in order for folks to, take a different route. There's alternative routes that you can do the same thing if you're going through the community. So I think we can impact and lower the overall volume on this corridor as well. It won't be by much. I'm not going to overpromise that, but the reality is we don't need a whole lot of through traffic going through here. And if we redesign it correctly, we can lower the speed. And I think for me as a driver, I would be more comfortable traveling. As long as I'm moving, I'm happy. The last thing I want to do is stop and go and stop and go and stop and go. And that's what's happening a lot along this corridor based on what we're hearing from folks. That's good. No, that's a great insight, and I was remiss if I didn't address that very issue. I think we have addressed it on Tuesday and Wednesday in the back of the symposium, but you are correct. That is the biggest trade-off that we are considering along this corridor. It's a lot of traffic, but we have alternative routes, and the reality is the 4-lane is acting for a lot of time during the day as a 3-lane road. All right, so with that, I wanted to show let's go to the actual concept design here, because I think this is wonderful. I want to show, we did some updates on here, and I'm just going to go from left to right, and then we'll drop down and show you some of the photo sims, basically at the street level. What does that look like? Okay. So what we're looking at here is an actual AutoCAD design. What that is a computer design software that engineers like myself use to show the physical footprint of the recommendations. Okay. And so I'm going to start on the west and head east all the way to Brown Street. So right now we're at Carolina Avenue and US 17 Business. And so you'll see here, as we apply that cross section, the 2-lane divided and 3-lane section, you can see we're putting in pockets of median. honestly, the median locations, they're going to change during final design, I'm sure. But the reality is it really helps to control access a little bit, but also protects from turning vehicles that are on there. The intersection here, we're really talking about celebrating this area as a gateway. And so we're recommending brick pavers and stamped asphalt for cross access and high visibility crosswalks, pedestrian countdowns, pedestrian level lighting and shade trees along here. We're going to do what was similar to 5th Street that you guys just finished up, your streetscape. We're going to enact a volunteer tree program. I think we talked about that previously as well with Jonathan and the mayor as well. That worked pretty well for you guys. So we're trying to embrace that. Considering you only have 60 foot of right of way out there, we want to limit or avoid that altogether, impacting that. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. Yesterday, someone asked how many trees would be acquired based on our recommendations. And I think Mary Day, I see her here, so welcome back. The answer is, I think none, because we actually went back and looked at aerial. We are confirming that as we speak, but there's no trees within the right-of-way, within the existing NCDOT right-of-way. So that's a really good thing. But the ones that are out there seem to be outside of the right-of-way, which is fantastic for everyone. So really, this is the gateway, maybe, and really think about it. As people come into this corridor, especially this segment of this corridor, we want to celebrate that a little bit. We want to, with a potential gateway monument saying, you know, you're in a different part of town, you should expect to see bicycle and pedestrian and people walking around too. So as we move eastward, you can see the application of the multimodal path. You can almost see back there the line which constitutes the existing right-of-way. So you can see we're staying within that on both sides. The south side, we have that, of course, a sidewalk that's located there. We are showing plantings of the median here and there. How big the caliper tree, whether that's cherry or cypress or whatever we're doing, we would advocate something narrow, but also with the canopy effect so you can see through it for proper sight distance. Other things you may note, we would advocate long-term through redevelopment if that was to occur. Certain parcels, remember we talked about this, cross-access is really a problem on the north side of 15th Street. And what I mean by that is all of these parcels here, Washington Plaza included, Minuteman Lane, that basically goes up and dead ends. So does Impulse Street, so does Jackson Street, so does Bennett Street, so do these parcels. That means every single trip made that goes in and out of these homes and in and out of these businesses has to get on to 15th Street. And folks, that's half your problem right there. Poor connectivity is prevalent on the north side of 15th Street. We've got to improve upon that. And therefore, the city understands that. And so when they go through their ordinance update, they're would like to see better connectivity and cross-access requirements through development and redevelopment. And I think that's a smart thing to do. So kudos to them. The next biggest intersection is Minuteman Lane. We like that's going to be incorporating all the signalized intersections. We're incorporating high quality intersections, high visibility, crosswalks, pedestrian countdowns, better lighting. We're advocating for mast arm signals, which would clean up a lot of the wire mess and cluster. And then brick pavers on some of those kind of signature intersections that people can kind of celebrate. Washington Plaza will come back to this location here. Again, probably turned over a number of times and probably not the highest and best use what's in there, but there's some really good things that we can do to help reactivate that space. We know that's on the market for sale, so kudos to them as we look forward and move forward. Then, of course, we have the Tractor Supply. As you can see, we've got some opening areas here to allow left turns, pockets of medians in there to control a little bit of access. And as we move forward, here's Van Norden, and I think we're showing this over here as well. Yeah, there you go. But Van Norden, we're actually showing a hawk signal. We want to break up, if I zoom out here, the next signal, the signal space between I think Washington, yeah, it was Washington, which is the entrance of Tractor Supply, and Market Street was pretty long, over 2,000, 2,500 feet. And so when people come in here, especially the neighborhoods, they're not gonna walk down to Market Street to cross. They're gonna run through it. So we wanted to break that up, put in a hawk signal, because I think you guys voted that you'd feel more safe with a hawk signal as opposed to a rapid flashing beacon. So we incorporated that here. In essence, now we can coordinate these signals all together. And that's one thing that's missing along this corridor. All these signals incorporating the hawk signal now we can create what we call a progression control signal system. So now they can all coordinate each other. So if you coordinate it for 35 miles an hour, now as a traveler, if you're going 40 or 45 or 50 miles an hour, you're most likely going to hit a lot of the stoplights. But if you go 35 miles an hour or 40, go 35, you're more apt to hit more green balls. In other words, 80% of those signals you have a potential of hitting when they're green, when you drive the speed limit. So it's kind of forcing that education upon our drivers, but making it more predictable and safer for pedestrians. Market Street, again, this is your center of the corridor. Very highly used multi-lanes along both directions here, but we wanted to make that more high profile with brick pavers, stamped asphalt. Again, you got the multi-use path and mast arm signals. We heard last night that Bonner, you guys told us that Bonner Street is a heavily used connection for folks that want to get to the cemetery and maybe walk. So we are putting in a rapid flashing beacon at this location. We don't want to put in a hawk signal because it's too close. It's within 420 feet of Market Street. So we didn't want to mess up that signal any. So we're putting in a rapid flashing beacon there. And then as we head more eastward, we got Holloman. We actually shifted the mid-block crossing from the church down to Holloman, and we split Holloman. And I'll show you what that looks like at the street level. This is a bad skewed intersection, 14th Street and Holloman Street. And we're advocating putting in a hawk signal there as well. And the reason for that is now these folks that are trying to get out and take a left turn and kind of this dead man's corner here, now they can do that because we're actually going to stop traffic for them and put in that hawk signal when activated by someone walking or someone on a bike. So we come to the end of our corridor near Vidant Hospital. And of course, here it is. We do have a roundabout. Now we can put that in there because it's a one-lane roundabout. The inscribed circle is 125 feet. And it's designed for the largest vehicle, the design vehicle along the entire corridor, which is the WB50, a tractor trailer. It's wide enough. We do have a 10-foot truck apron in there as well. And it really fixes those really bad skews. 12th Street, we heard people having a hard time getting onto 15th Street because this is and I will call this kind of a dead man's curve here. It's very dangerous. And Chief Drakeford had mentioned that this signal was one of the highest ones where we see a lot of ticketing for people blasting through red lights on here. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Dan and see what we have in the chat box.
Yeah, I got a couple.
I know I kind of zipped through that a little bit.
Yeah, not a problem. That was, I think it was important to see the whole corridor. So a couple comments here. And I think so. The first is from Betsy saying, does the coordinated signal timing help accommodate those traffic amounts? I think that's going back to Fred's comment and Beth, who followed up just saying that, looking at at 5th Street and the improvements they did there, can't imagine that the street would be the same by shifting to 2 lanes. So maybe you can talk about how not just the design of the road, but how that signal timing might help with the traffic as well.
Wow, that's a good point. Yeah, I had to reread that to figure out what that was. So yes, I would say directly, let me answer your question. Does the coordinated signal timing help accommodate the traffic amounts, the volume of traffic? I would say yes, as a deterrent. Because look, we all get in our cars, especially people that are going through your community, Washington, to get to the coast, to get to their week-long rental, right? And they're all doing the same thing. They're using GPS to get through your community. And when the GPS tells folks to go through 15th Street because it's quicker, that's what the logical they're following. That's why we don't have a whole lot of traffic on 264. The actual route, the route that should be carrying more US, more intrastate, more traffic through your community. It's a US route. We should advocate more traffic going through the US route. This is a local route. It's 15th Street. And so if we coordinate these signals, I go back to that, if we coordinate these signals for a 35, say we lower the speed down to 35 miles an hour and continuously, then that GPS is going to say, well, that's a slower route. You may want to go on US 264 like it should. So indirectly, we're actually shifting some of that traffic to 264, in which they should be using that to go through your community. So indirectly, we are lowering the speed, and it should address the traffic amount. And Betsy, you're an engineer planner with DOT, used to be. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I covered it pretty well, Mike. I don't have anything to add to that. I would like to see that we use that 5th Street, which is the US 264 corridor, because DOT did retrofit, do some adjustments several years ago to reflect that. And I would be reluctant to turn our whole city into a series of parallel routes, which are all problematic for pedestrians and local traffic. So we want to, the businesses are along 15th Street, and 5th Street is the US route. So we want to keep one as a business-oriented destination route where there's a lot of local trips, and separate that to some extent from the serious through travel, because they don't really mix that well.
Yeah, this is true. Thank you, Betsy. That was awesome. And that's the reality. I mean, and here's the reality. I go back to a couple comments before. There is no silver bullet that we can put out there that's going to address all the needs, address all the problems, and the desires of the community as a whole. We know there's going to be some trade-offs, and that's the reality of retrofitting a road like this, and any road like this, but you guys are doing great. I want to show a couple perspectives. Mary Day, this was your favorite intersection you asked about, so we wanted to show you what that looks like. Do we have the after effect on that? Dan, somewhere?
For what now?
I thought we had some an update of that one, but apparently not. Let me see.
Of the Market Street intersection? I think
Yeah.
you may need to refresh your browser.
Whoops.
It may have not fully loaded at the time of the
Okay. All right. Well, let's just walk through the ones that we have. And folks, some of you have seen this. This is Washington Plaza. And again, this is kind of a skewed angle looking at that. We wanted to show this because twofold. One is, how would the retrofit happen? So what we're advocating for here is that we're trying to repurpose this area. So we take that outside on the north side, but the outside curb and gutter, and bring that in. And that's where we put in our planting strip and our 10-foot multi-use path on there, and the remaining area of the right-of-way, which again, that's the area, Betsy's gonna correct me, that's the area that's owned and operated today by the State Department of Transportation. And that's the area that we're making changes to. We're not taking anybody's private property on that. So your power poles, especially the ones with the transformers, are actually outside of the right-of-way, or just on the cusp of your right-of-way line there too. And we do not want to touch those as well. And that'll save us a lot of heartache down the road. So what does that look like? We took the liberty to looking at Washington Square only because, it's seen a lot of turnover. It's got a sea of parking in there, and who knows what that's going to look like in 10 or 15 years. I think it's on the market, like we mentioned earlier, but we're hoping that redevelopment does occur. And in fact, we're not saying, get rid of the Mexican restaurant here, but wouldn't it be great to enhance more business for that restaurant, to have some more outside seating, some of the things that you guys themselves had indicated in our survey work. So we actually reduced the curb down here and put in a planting strip and put in your multi-use path on the side here, pedestrian level lighting, maybe a banner or two to kind of celebrate the corridor. And then we'd have this, in this segment, obviously, there's no curb cuts here, there's no driveway. So this is an area that we could slip in a planted median. Will it be planted to this glorious level? Probably not, but you get a picture of what that could become. Van Norden, I think this is where Vanessa lives here. And I think, there's problematic, because as a walker or someone on a bike or someone that's handicapped, how do you get across this road? And the reality is, I'm going to zoom in, it's over 1,500 feet to the nearest crosswalk. No one's going to do that. And what's happening, as verified by some of the folks that live off of Van Norden, is people are running across and taking their life in their own hands. So, and that's not a good thing either. So what would that look like with a mid-block crossing? Reduce the lanes down to 3 here and provide dedicated left turn bays here, and then put in a hawk signal. And what that does, it's going to stop vehicles, especially if there's a pedestrian or bicycle, pushes the button and allows cars to stop at the proper location. And there's your multi-use path. Again, this is the north side, so we're actually looking towards the west. We're looking towards Carolina Avenue. Dan, anything on the chat box?
Yeah, I want to circle back a little bit, actually, because I think there's still some lingering questions about the Fifth Street improvements and what that congestion might look like on 15th by potentially bringing the lanes in a little bit. So maybe if you could talk about maybe the role that 15th Street plays here and why the complete street design might be intentionally shifting some of that traffic over onto Fifth Street.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And that was a question, right?
It is, yes. So, Dennis, you said, look at the backup on 3rd Street, or sorry, 5th Street, and the Route 17 intersection where they went down to 2 lanes. I can't believe it won't be the same. And I think there's a broader sort of 4 lanes versus 2 lanes and what the role of 15th Street is.
Yeah, well, and that's it. That whoever brought that up, that was a great question because, you know, if you think about it, 120 years ago plus, when this 15th Street was created, you know, its function and design back then isn't serving the same purpose that it is today. But if you think about it, we've done nothing to improve 15th Street. And so 15th Street, that's a great comment. 15th Street is trying to do everything for everyone. Live, work, play. You have residents along the entire corridor, single family mostly. You have businesses, you have commercial and retail. You have your food line, you have your only grocery store within this region in there, Tractor Supply and shopping and Belks and all of that. But you also have medical clinics, you have the regional hospital here. And so many things that this corridor is trying to do, as well as through trip traffic too. It's not to say they can't provide the same function later on. It just means we've got to level the playing field. Right now, it's designed for cars and cars only. We all know that. The number one issue, as expressed by NCDOT and the community that you live in, is safety. And it's not only safety for the people behind the wheels, it's safety for the people that are not behind the wheel, the walkers, the runners, the cyclists, and the folks that are disabled. Right now, there is 0 treatments for those people. 0, I repeat. So in the past 5 years alone, you've had 3 fatalities for pedestrians and bicyclists. I'll venture to guess that is unacceptable for your community. And I think that we do need to give that back, and we need to balance the area dedicated to moving cars and moving people. We're not prohibiting trucks, we're not prohibiting cars, and we're certainly not prohibiting through traffic. But the reality is that some of that traffic will shift a little bit. I wouldn't guess it's going to be too much, because based on experience in Hillsborough Street in Raleigh, the one that I brought up, honestly, the city traffic engineers and NCDOT didn't know where the traffic went. The other parallel roads didn't increase. And I'm hoping that's the same here. When you improve connectivity outside of this corridor, like on the north side, like we're advocating through redevelopment or through DOT making better collector street connections with the city, you're going to pull a lot of that traffic off of 15th Street. Because all of that traffic on the north side, like we said, has to use every single trip they get in their car. They have to use 15th Street to do it. Now, as we move forward, yes, you know you're going to impact some traffic here. But our premise is, collectively, I'd rather be moving along this corridor at a slower pace than stopping and going and stopping and going and stopping and going. I'd also like to walk, and some of those trips are going to be converted to walking and bicycling as well. A lot of people had told us on the survey and during that project symposium that people are getting in their car. And we know it. We heard it on Tuesday. People are getting in their car to drive to the cemetery to walk because they don't want to cross the road. people are getting their car to take trips that they would love to walk to get those trips. I'm going to turn it over to maybe Betsy or Aaron or Jonathan to kind of give us your local perspective as well, because this is really meaningful, and I don't want to brush it off at any, but this is the reality. There's going to be some trade-offs, going to be a little bit of pain through construction, but at the end of the day, this facility is going to work so much better than what it works today, and it's going to be tremendously more safe. Betsy or Jonathan?
I can speak to what I hear people saying. I'm a city councilor serving my first term, and I ran in part because I heard so much frustration with the lack of action accommodating people on foot, people who use bikes to run basic errands and to go to their place of work. I see them all day, everywhere, whether I'm in my car or walking. I see our people who use bikes as basic transportation. And as you said, Mike, there is nothing for them, but there is a tremendous desire on the part of the public. And, you know, in part, that's why I'm on city council, because so many people responded to that. And I was responding to what I heard from others in Washington. And more than that, it's a fundamental question of civil rights. We have people in mobility chairs, scooters, we have wheelchair bound residents. There's a nonprofit, the Blind Center, located in Washington, which has many clients. And so we have visually impaired people too. And again, there is nothing for them. Almost every day, I see not one or two, but multiple people navigating in car-packed streets in wheelchairs. And that is just wrong. And I vowed that I would serve my council term in part to begin to address the needs of those people. And guess what? When we address the needs of people in wheelchairs and 8-year-olds and people who are in their 70s and 80s, guess what we also do? We just address the needs of everyone else. So we're covering 100% of our human community here. And that's what it's all about. You know, and I definitely want this corridor to be amenable for car safety too, because there's plenty of wrecks for cars, and we cannot stick with what we've got, and we can do a lot better. So I think that's what this is all about. We have to compare it not to a perfect world, but to the real world, and we can make it tremendously better with what you've proposed. So much better. The status quo is not acceptable. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks. And this is no kidding matter. So this is, change is tough too. We all realize that it's not for everyone, and it's tough to accept, but we're learning from our experiences elsewhere. We're learning from our constituency here in the city. And I think, we want different. We want to feel safe going to the store. We don't want to have to get into our cars to do every trip. So let's move ahead. I saw some conversation up there. I think someone mentioned a goat path along the corridor there. There's a dirt. Andy, thanks for chiming in there. There's a dirt pathway being worn into the grass along south side of 15th Street. Lots of people walk down that road. Yeah. And unfortunately,
okay,
go ahead.
No, there's one other comment that I think we'll address, but go ahead.
All right, well, in the interest of time, let's check out some other photo sims. So this is actually looking east. This is Minuteman Lane looking east. And I guess, that's where the two shopping centers are, right across from each other, Washington Plaza on the north side and Washington Square on the south side. So lots of cluster here. We're probably not going to touch any of the high tension transmission lines that you see here.